to me, this is the most interesting conversation and my biggest question. And Trevor, you may remember I actually hit you up on the app formerly known as Twitter recently.
Just call it Twitter.
I can't say I hit you up on X because it sounds like we're doing something we're not supposed to be doing. I hit you up on I X'd you. I hit you up on Twitter because I saw this was really how this whole episode came about. Was I saw your depth chart, the one that you guys put out. I thought it was great, and then I started to scratch my head because I saw Mike Sainristil sitting in the first position of two different spots in the secondary, and I was like, "Hey, Trevor, explain this to me." And you really got my wheels turning a little bit because we just assumed that Sainristil is going to be kind of that nickel guy that's a little closer to the line of scrimmage. He's not going to be on the outside. But if you really look at it, the two best defensive backs on this team are Will Johnson and Mike Sainristil. So there's nothing that's stopping Coach Klink and Jim Harbaugh from saying, you know what? Why don't we put Mike Sainristil, across from Will Johnson on the outside and then worry about who we're going to plug into that nickel spot. And to me, because of the spring game, I was there in person, and the guy that I've repeatedly said looked really impressive to me physically was Zeke Berry. I've been just wondering, like, how does Zeke Berry get on the field? And so my ideal way to fill these gaps isn't what everybody else is talking about, which is McBurrows or Amarion Walker or Jair Hill, like who goes in there. For me, it's like, why not just have Sainristil, Will Johnson, and Zeke Berry come out there as your three starters? Yeah. So my question, that's not really a question, but my question is, do you see that as a real possibility, or does it really come back to that's not a likely scenario?
No, I am the president of the fan club for what you just said. I love the idea of Zeke Berry rising at nickel because Will Johnson might be the backup nickel right now, right? Like that's Rod Moore. People forget the Dax Hill type role can play nickel, right? Zeke Berry can play nickel, corner, safety, Sainristil, whatever. These four guys can play every spot, right? So I love the idea of having them all on the field at the same time. Now, that being said, McBurrows is a guy that can play nickel as well. He's a physical dude. He can come up and impact the run game. That's the reason I think you want to keep Mike Sainristil in the nickel is when you grade out pass rushing in terms of pass rush efficiency, Sainristil is one of the best on the team when it comes to beating blocks and getting to the quarterback in under 3 seconds, right? His impact in the run game, tackle for loss. I think you want to have him close, and that's the benefits of figuring out that CBT2 role. If Berry can rise, then okay. But yeah, the reason we wrote the depth chart the way we did is we just talked about they might go with 3 linebackers and say, hey, let's just go 4 in the secondary. Am I taking Mike Sainristil off the field to leave Jayden McBurrows on the field? I don't think you are. He's the second best corner, right? So that's where he stays in the outside role. I do think someone's going to rise from that group. Josh Wallace is getting a lot of hype from Mike Sainristil, is one of the people that's been hyping him up as well. You bring in his experience. I think it's comparable to if Jamon Green had stuck around, right? You have that type of experience and talent, but it's not that the young guys couldn't push there. That battle's going to happen throughout the year. They're going to rotate guys, etc. I do think you want to keep Sainristil at nickel, but man, if you're talking about from a competitive standpoint, if Zeke Berry rises and you're like, hey, I think we like him more than, not that Walker can't become something elite, but right now, is Zeke Berry the best of that group? And am I better off leaving Sainristil out there? I absolutely think that's an option.
Matt, how do you see that secondary shaking out?
Yeah, no, I think that, in fact, you and I were both talking about it last week. I thought that that Trevor had a very good translation of how Harbaugh broke it down, obviously, while he was doing his positional rant, obviously going down the list of starters, named Mike Sainristil and Will Johnson as cornerback starters for that position. So, I mean, obviously, you can attribute that to them just being tea leaves that Harbaugh's leaving for us. But really, I think that it more kind of falls in line with what both of you guys are saying, that we see Mike Sainristil on the field, Will Johnson on the field, but then more sets where more safeties might be utilized, different defensive back sets. There's really all kinds of ways that Steve Clinkscale and the Michigan defense can approach it. It's going to be interesting, but I was a huge fan of the addition of Josh Wallace, regardless of if he's going to be the guy at the end of the season, just because with Michigan wanting to compete for a national championship like they're doing, you need depth at every position group. So I was still a big fan that they went out and got a guy like Josh Wallace, but I just think that there's so many weapons back there for Michigan to play around with that there's really no worry at all for how that layer of the defense is going to perform for them, from my end at least.
Man, I'm so glad you brought up Josh Wallace, because that's a name we haven't mentioned yet that needs to be mentioned, right? Like he is a guy with a ton of experience, could very well solve that issue for us. You know, he might be the guy that steps in across from Will Johnson that allows us to play Mike Sainristil in a much more aggressive position of the field. So amazing call out there, Matt.